Good morning. So today's video for day 4 of the semester will be done out. I am walking the dogs, and today it's only supposed to be about 91, which should be nice. That heat all got sucked up by the hurricane off to the east. I hope that everybody is doing okay over there. They don't really know what's going on in the aftermath of Hurricane Laura, so that's going to be really interesting, especially in light of the pandemic and start of school and everything that's going on in Louisiana. It's moving up through Arkansas and then off to the east. I'm a little concerned about its trajectory because it's headed, I guess, towards Washington, D.C., which is very low. So if the hurricane remnants sit and soak things there, that can be problematic. I have family up in New Jersey, and we've had issues with hurricanes going and sitting on top of New Jersey before and flooding everything out, causing a ton of damage and problems, both for just the community at large, but thinking about it from school systems, I don't know how New Jersey and these states that are trying to provide education during COVID and then weather problems are going to cope, especially with power outages, internet outages, and everything else. So there's a lot of things that we haven't really prepared for. We don't have enough backup in a lot of instances. In case the internet goes down, we're really relying on something that is prone to damage from weather that makes it unreliable. So I keep thinking about readiness. I've built out these surveys and readiness guide and all that stuff, but we need a lot more redundancy in our educational systems in order to provide educational experiences to make sure that students can learn when we have disasters, and those disasters are just going to keep increasing according to the research on climate change. So as ed tech type folks, we need to think a lot more about how we're going to build redundancy into our systems. I prefer synchronous types of meetings to asynchronous. Just increases the interactivity, and I provide a lot more value, I think, with synchronous class meetings than I do with asynchronous discussions, because I'm supposed to be an expert, so providing my expertise through synchronous rapid interactions seems to be more efficient than asynchronous, but asynchronous has its place, especially as part of this redundancy component for making sure that students can still access interactions. But we also need to have non-online at all interactions planned for when those things go down. I'm starting to think about how I can provide a lot of the same types of activities listed in a PDF so that students can still do work if they have internet, or they can just print off the directions for what activities to do. Really going back to more of a pre-heavy internet 90s model, really the way that I experienced my master's and undergraduate. Here's the stuff, you print it off. If the power goes out and you can sit outside in the sun and read it off and do those activities, you're good. But we really need to have multiple levels of redundancy with education now, and I don't feel like that's being done enough. I know that some people are doing maybe 2 levels of redundancy, but we really need to have multiple levels of redundancy with varying levels of interaction, recognizing that there is an ideal that kind of replaces the face-to-face classroom the best way that we possibly can and provides all of the learning affordances of that by replicating those things with synchronous tools. Zoom is still constantly going down right now. Canvas is having a lot of problems. My daughters 2 of her classes wound up not getting online until well after they were supposed to be, so she couldn't do work until after the school day was technically over yesterday. And that wasn't the teacher's fault. That was a system problem. And right now we're dealing with a lot of that as they try to get these systems up and ready to accommodate the load of all of these students being on concurrently, which is really challenging. One of my other big questions is, how much is this all going to increase our energy usage at homes, and how much of what was borne by the community in terms of the expense of electricity and internet access and everything else is being shifted onto families, many of whom couldn't afford it particularly before, and now are going to be bearing a big new expense starting this month. I think there may be quite a few surprise electricity bills next month, because a lot of folks are going to be running multiple laptops at home or desktops, other devices, charging things a lot more often, having to run the air conditioning at home a lot more, especially in southern states. And so that increases their cost to provide education at home significantly, and that used to be borne by the school districts and the community in a shared way. And a school building can be designed to be more efficient with the air conditioning and everything. So I think there's going to be a lot of expenses people aren't prepared for. Plus, if you're redistributing that electricity cost out through everybody else, and people are doing this through less efficient individual homes, that's going to increase the carbon footprint, especially if you're in communities that don't have a lot of renewable energy sources. So we really have to think about a lot of the unintended consequences of online. Not saying we shouldn't do online, it's what we need to do in a pandemic, but how do we defray the costs for folks that have to absorb these surprise increases going forward? Hi, good morning.
It's too much to keep organized. At least keeping the kiddos.
So that's a big question. We're also having to distribute folks. I know that a lot of people are being called back into face-to-face offices next week, so it's going to be really hard for them to take care of their kids. In a news story locally this morning, I read that the local school district is letting local employees have their kids in their offices and classrooms to do online school, which is helpful for folks who don't have that availability, that flexibility. You're creating a huge amount of logistical problems that are going to cause heartache for parents and students who are trying to do online school. So there's just so much we have to think through, and a lot of investment that we really haven't thought through, and a lot of expense. So this one is longer than usual. Yesterday, my kids were doing online school really for the first time. It is the beginning of the semester, so just like in a higher ed environment, there were a lot of introduction activities. And depending on, say, the technical skill of the student or whether they could understand the directions being provided, there was a lot of variation just in my very small observations at home in how long it was taking students to do things, how invested they were in completing activities. So just like with higher ed, when you've just got, hey, introduce yourself discussion forums that only take a little bit of time, in my higher ed classes traditionally, sorry about that, trying to hold my phone and deal with my crazy dogs at the same time. That first week is often not a lot of content. It's a lot of just getting to know you stuff that doesn't take very long. So your first week, you might only spend a grand total of an hour to 2 to 3 hours completing that work. Then by week 2, as you start to really get into the content in a higher ed course, you might be up to 6, 7, 8, 9 hours doing a lot more intensive work. So I expect as each day goes on in the classes that my students this week, my kids at home, didn't spend a lot of time. I think one of them only spent 15 to 30 minutes total out of an hour doing active work. Another child was more like 30 to 45 minutes because of how much work was planned into the day. But I expect that to change, although I got an email yesterday saying that they really only expect the kid to be working 20 minutes out of an hour per day in that subject area, which trying to think about this in relation to traditional types of class periods. And when I was a middle school and high school teacher, I taught in 2 different places with 2 different time breakdowns. The first was the kind of 42 minutes to 43 minutes period, 7 periods a day, what a lot of parents might have experienced when they were in school. That's what I had in middle school and high school myself, versus when I started as a middle school teacher. Sorry, it is trash day here in glorious Denton, Texas. We had block scheduling when I was teaching middle school, where you would have 90-minute periods, 3 periods with kind of 1 off period as a teacher, but the students would have 4 periods a day at 90 minutes. So out of a 42-minute period, for example, when I was teaching, I would probably expect my kids to be doing 35, 36 minutes worth of activities, including mini lessons, including individualized activities, discussion groups, things like that, as I would break out activities. Of course, that all varied based on the day. Sometimes they would just be preparing for tests or taking tests, doing writing practice. I was an English and social studies teacher. But I would still expect, out of 42 minutes, probably 30 to 35 minutes a day at a minimum after all the administrative tasks were done, etc. Sorry about the stopping and starting. The dogs don't understand leashes, so they keep trapping my legs and trying to knock me down accidentally. Within a 90-minute class period, that was harder. You'd have to break things down. It was really like combining 2 of those 42-minute periods. So you'd need to build in breaks because kids get tired. Just like adults get tired, you can't work nonstop. So at the 42-minute period, I would usually work in maybe 3 3-minute breaks. And then in the 42-minute, they actually got more tired, I noticed, and it really dragged. It was hard on the middle school kids, and I understand the underlying reasoning for doing it that way, but it didn't seem to understand the basic of being a middle school kid. Your attention is just not really high enough to attend for that long, so I would often have to build in like 5 to 10 minute breaks out of 90 minutes, maybe 4 of those or 5 sometimes, and I'd have to vary based on the day. So it'll be interesting to see how the teachers break this out, if they attend to what students are doing, because they're really only going to have analytics. They're not going to have a lot of the synchronous meetings, and if they don't ask students if the way that it's structured is too tiring, they're not going to know why things are working or not working. So we really need more diagnostic assessment as kids are moved online, than especially more than we did in the spring, which was not much. And going forward, we have to just ask more questions. we have to do a lot more observation, a lot more research as we go about what works generally for different students, while recognizing that we have to differentiate based on kids' attention spans, access to technology. There's just a lot that we still don't know, and we're proceeding as if we do. So I'll keep reporting back about my kids' experiences in my class, my doc class teaching. This week we're doing asynchronous. I'm only doing 7 synchronous meetings throughout the semester, trying to be accommodating of COVID more. I prefer to do a lot of synchronous meetings. It helps me feel more connected to students and them to me. I can answer questions more quickly versus a lot of back and forth by email that is inefficient, or back and forth through discussion forums that's inefficient. Plus, since there's no concentration of time with discussion forums, people can randomly respond, and they want a response based on when they posted. And if that doesn't fit with when the instructor is working, students can get upset because they're posting at 3 o'clock in the morning while you're asleep sometimes, and they want a response right away and expect it. And this isn't always true, but I have had this experience with asynchronous discussion forums, and then they get upset because you didn't respond based on their personal timeline, and that doesn't really work. So we'll have to see what happens with all of this going forward. But I do believe that we're going to have to build a lot more redundancy in. Yesterday, the power went out at my house for a couple of hours because of the winds that were kind of ancillary to the storms. And so if we were doing that during the day, my kids wouldn't have had access to Canvas or anything else. But I could have printed off PDFs so the kids would have had things to do. So, I don't know. We got to think about this more. In the meantime, it's supposed to be 91 today, 103 tomorrow, 103 the next day, then in the upper 90s and low hundreds for a couple of days, and then hopefully start to cool off. It is still August in Texas, so the temperatures are unpleasant, and we get a lot of weird stuff when hurricanes go by to the east. But I hope that everybody is safe. I hope that everybody is being successful with what they're trying to get through right now. And I hope you all have a great day.